series. We're super excited to have this new program, launch it a few weeks ago as a way to stay engaged with our community and also to support the traveling school and our students during this difficult time. So we have raised actually $2,600 in the past couple weeks just through this initiative. So thank you everybody who's already given. And for those of you who have not, that is totally fine. This is a donation optional program, but we do hope that you consider a donation of any amount to support financial aid students. And we are so excited to have Anna Taft, our presenter this evening. Most of you probably know her. She taught 3 semesters with the traveling school, TTS 3, 5, and 6. Maybe taught with Lander, is that right?
Yep.
Gotcha, a little reunion happening. And then she went on to found and lead the Tandana Foundation in Ecuador, and the traveling school still partners with Tandana on semester, and I'm sure she'll talk a little bit more about that. So thank you for being here, Anna, and thank you to all of you. And Anna, take it away.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you so much to all of you for coming. It's great to see some familiar faces and a few new faces, and I really appreciate you joining us. As Laura mentioned, I taught 3 semesters for the traveling school. And while I was doing that, I realized that what I most enjoyed about traveling was connecting with people and then getting to see them again when we return to the same places in the next years. And I decided that I wanted to focus on building long-term relationships in the area of Ecuador where I already had the deepest connections. And so I started the Tandana Foundation in order to do that. And pretty soon I ended up connecting with people in a very different area in central Mali. And now Tandana works with communities in both of these areas, supporting achievement of community goals. And we do lots of different kinds of projects and programs, but tonight I'm going to share about the philosophy behind our work, which I believe can also enrich other kinds of work as well. Now, as human beings, we can take multiple perspectives on things, including ourselves and other people and larger contexts, and we can represent these perspectives visually. For example, this is a view from a somewhat distant location above the scene. So what are we looking at? Who can tell me what this is we're looking at? Don't be shy.
Market.
Yes, a market. Does anybody know which market this is? By any chance?
Otavalo, maybe?
Otavalo.
Exactly, the Otavalo market. Now, here we have a very different perspective on the Otavalo market. What's different about this view?
Very personal.
Yeah, don't be shy. Just jump in and yeah, so this is a personal view. We can see one individual. We can see what she's doing, what she's holding, right? Okay, how about here? What are we looking at here?
School playground.
A school playground. And what kind of perspective is this?
Aerial.
Aerial, yeah. And how about now?
I'm on the ground looking at them.
So now we're on the ground looking at these soccer players, right? So between those 2 perspectives, which one do you think would be more useful if we're trying to really understand the relative locations on the field of all the players?
The ladder.
This one?
I think the above, the aerial view.
The aerial view?
I would think the aerial view, yeah.
I would think the aerial view probably, if we're trying to really see where they are all in relation to each other, right? But what if we want to know who the players are? Which one is going to be more useful?
The close-up.
Yeah, this one, the ground level one, right? So if we want to know what position everybody's playing, we might want to use the first one. But if we want to actually join in this game, we're going to have to come down to this second point of view, right? And how about now? What are we looking at now? Can anybody tell?
Community
We're
building.
making concrete.
Yeah, we're making concrete, we're building something, right? Probably. So this is actually a Tandana service project in Ecuador, in progress here. And here we have another view of the same scene. So in this case, what are some purposes that each of those two views might be useful for? Any thoughts?
The high view can show the whole project and not everybody involved, but this view can show the interaction between our volunteers and the local people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so each perspective has its advantages and the things that it's useful for and other things it's less useful for, right? And the vocabulary and the language that we use reveal our perspective. And so for right now, we're going to think about the world of international development, because that's the world that Tandana and to some extent the traveling school work, I wouldn't say in, but parallel to. So now I would ask you to please type in the chat just any words that come to mind that you commonly associate with development. You know, when you think about international development, what are some words that come to mind? So please type those in the chat if you don't mind. Money, white savior complex, good, very good. What else? So if you're organizing, you know, if we're organizing a development project, okay, developed, developing, hegemony, all right, growth, skills, debt, progress, donor priorities versus local priorities, imperialism, okay, very good. So pretend you're colonialism, okay, pretend you're working for the World Bank or, you know, some huge development organization. What are some words that you're likely to use often as you're doing that? Economic growth, right on. Projects, developing country, return on investment, payback, culture, benefit. Okay, very good. What kind of perspective do these words suggest? So when you hear these words, what kind of perspective do you think we're taking? Top down, all right, look at that. Macro, these are great. Superiority, top-down development, great. So just if we look at that top-down, we're probably going to be taking a perspective from above, right? Kind of like those first pictures in those sets of different perspectives. And I would suggest that thinking about development and about public affairs more generally is overly dominated by a detached instrumental perspective, one that seeks to control from above rather than to respond from within. And Akil Bilgrami highlights how a shift in vocabulary accompanied this shift in perspective that became dominant during the European Enlightenment. And he asks, how and when did we transform the concept of nature into the concept of natural resources? How and when did we transform the concept of human beings into the concept of citizens? How and when did we transform the concept of people into the concept of populations? And how and when did we transform the concept of knowledges to live by into the concept of expertise to rule by? And I think that this vocabulary sort of shows this detached perspective, and that we see it really everywhere we look in development. And this is an excerpt from the instructions for a grant application. Can you see this? Can you all read this a little bit? Okay, great. So if you look at the language here and you approach it from not from the top rooftop perspective, but from the ground level personal view, what seems a little bit odd about this language? Or what seems like kind of strange if you think about this just as a regular person and not as a World Bank executive or something like that? Let me get out of the way a little bit. Sorry, it's getting a little bit dark and that's making my green screen not work quite as well. Okay, great. Target populations, great. Yes. So I love that. So target populations, what's a different context when we usually talk about targets besides development projects? We're going to use a target, right? If we're like shooting, exactly. If we're shooting. Right on, Nolan says shooting, very good. You know, this sort of shows that we are trying to shoot some kind of intervention at a target population, right? Which is kind of a strange way to think about it if you imagine yourself as being part of that target population. Like, do you really want this intervention to be shot at you? Also, people wrote about the problem, right? This focus on a problem and a need, which of course there are problems and needs in the world, and it's great to address those. But I feel like we can also take a different focus where we can focus on opportunities and we can see what there is and what assets there are, what resources there are, and what opportunities there are to bring those together. So yeah, okay, thinking of people as objects, investments, and not human beings, exactly. And so if we take this kind of perspective, then we can make a logic model like this, which shows linear relationships between activities, outcomes, and outputs, and everything's neat and organized. And it makes us think that we can control human affairs as if they were something that we could make. But social changes or human affairs are not something that we can manufacture like a chair or a table. My Tandana colleagues and I have seen countless failures that result from development projects conceived from this detached instrumental perspective. So many projects like these that are abandoned and crumbling. And according to William Easterly, the West has spent $2.3 trillion on foreign aid and still hasn't managed to get 12-cent medicine or $4 bed nets to families who need them to prevent deaths. And this detached perspective also precludes agency. It doesn't recognize the ability of these target populations to act or even to define their own priorities. And the experiences of many of our partners highlight the frequent failures of NGOs that rely on an overly detached approach that allows them to ignore the basic values of human interaction. Husseini Pamatek, who now works for Tandana and is from the village of Saldimi in Mali, said, NGOs, without understanding the problem in the village, they come with a certain sum of money to do a certain project. We want to give you a building for shallots. They build it. The building is there, but there's no follow-up. They never see if it's being used or if it's working or if anyone is managing it. There are lots of buildings that have fallen down because of that. They come with their idea and tell the people, no matter what, you have to do this. We had experience with other NGOs who gave us false promises. They said they're coming on a certain day and we waited for them impatiently, but they never came. They asked us to break stones, but then they never showed up. So we had problems with NGOs like that. And Yaguno Tembine from Kansongo, Mali, named the impression that these NGOs often give to the people that they're supposedly helping. She said, other NGOs work for their own benefit rather than for the village. But it's possible to take a different approach. And without abandoning the ability to see from a distant viewpoint, to see relationships, we can start from a first person orientation and consciously act in a human context. Starting with a personal ground level perspective, we see others eye to eye, and we interact primarily as fellow human beings with equal dignity and worth, interacting in a world of human affairs. This is the approach that we take with Tandana, and I found that it leads to prioritizing relational forms of morality and to opportunities for meaningful action. So this diagram shows how if we begin from a personal perspective, along with a willingness to engage with others who are different, we can have particular experiences that lead to the development of relational values and ultimately result in hopefully compassion, wisdom, and intercultural relationships. And if you're interested, I've written at length about this, drawing on the insights of philosophers like Emmanuel Levinas and Hannah Arendt. But today I'm just going to highlight a few aspects. Just in case anyone wants to read the 150-page version, Trace is going to copy the link into the chat for you. So with a personal approach, relational forms of morality guide us. When we see another person face to face, moral obligations arise experientially. When we look another person in the face, we recognize a unique who deserving of respect. And I'm going to share a brief story that taught me the nuanced meaning of respect. We were working with the village of Kansongo in Mali, and they wanted to create a fruit orchard. And they had asked for fruit tree seedlings and a chain link fence to protect them. So I knew that everywhere in the village, there were no chain link fences, and there were lots of beautiful stone walls. And I thought, you know, instead of valorizing this modern look of the chain link fence, why don't we try to show respect for local expertise and local technologies? And what if we built a stone wall instead of a fence? And so I suggested this, and the leaders organizing the project in the village agreed. And so, you know, I thought it would look much better, it would fit in with the aesthetic, and that this would be a way to valorize local ways of doing things. And so young men blasted boulders from the sandstone bedrock and rolled them into place. And our visiting Tandana volunteers helped local women and youth carry smaller stones and stack them on top of the boulders. And after several days of work, the wall was completed and we planted the young fruit trees inside there, and it looked just great. It looked terrific. Well, just a few weeks later, I heard that goats had climbed over the wall and eaten a few of the seedlings. And then during the next rainy season, there was a huge storm and part of the wall blew over. And well, after that, we provided funds for a chain link fence. And I realized that respect required really listening to our partners and trying to understand the reasons for the ways they wanted to do things, instead of assuming I knew the reasons and thinking that it was more important to show respect for an abstract idea I had of local technologies. Another important relational value is responsibility. And in a relationship, responsibility involves self-constancy. So it's being someone that another person can count on. It also involves responding to another's need from a position of freedom. And through our healthcare work in Ecuador, we learned about what it takes to be responsible. We had started a mobile clinic program. We were invited by local communities to bring teams, medical teams that included volunteers from the US and local healthcare providers. And some of you have been on those programs and know what I'm talking about. It seemed great. We had a lot of patients came and people were really interested, and our doctors were trying their best to learn from local providers and work together. And there were often patients who needed to be referred to see specialists or have additional testing or surgeries. And our doctors might tell them to go to the hospital and see a urologist, or to go to the local vision clinic and get evaluated for cataract surgery. And when we returned and saw the same patients again, we realized that they had not gone to the hospital or the clinic. And it turned out that even though healthcare in the public system is free, there are many barriers, from distance to racism to fear and unfamiliarity, that prevented them from accessing the healthcare. And so we realized that to be responsible in our relationships, we needed to provide follow-up support. So now we have a permanent staff member who helps patients navigate the public health resources that are available and teaches them how to use the system on their own. Now, it's also important that responsibility be reciprocal. I've seen a few cases where sometimes foreigners wanting to be very respectful don't want to hold community partners accountable. But if you don't expect responsibility from community members, you tend towards paternalism. And when he was president of the community of Manala, Ecuador, Fabian Pinsag said, "It's one thing to ask for help and another to provide follow-up and show the responsibility of the community, as it should be. We have planted trees with Tandana's help, and we put up barbed wire so the animals won't damage them." So in my view, an organization can do well to emphasize the personal perspective and its relational morality so as to counterbalance the excessive detachment of dominant approaches. But we also can't take a purely personal approach. We need some aspects of a more detached perspective to avoid conflicts of interest and to temper some of the overly personal aspects. And Lisa Stevenson highlights the difference between personal care and anonymous care. So in personal care, it matters who a person is, whereas in anonymous care, it matters what the person is. In personal care, specific relationships are important and friendships are valued. In anonymous care, personal connections are supposed to be suppressed and you're supposed to follow abstract rules. So an organization needs to balance these two forms of care. And at Tandana, we try to use personal care to show our partners that we see them as people with equal human dignity and that they matter to us. But we also use certain policies and criteria to offer a measure of fairness. So organizations can bring together personal and abstract elements to do their best work. But it's not always easy to integrate these two forms of care or to find the right balance. There are definitely situations when they come into tension with each other. And so now we're going to break into some small groups, and each group will have one scenario. I'd like you to read that scenario and discuss as you're within your group. So what would you do in this situation if you were going to take purely a personal form of care? On the other hand, what would you do if you were going to take purely an anonymous form of care? And then the hard part is, can you find a way to balance those two? Can you find a solution that might integrate aspects of personal and detached approaches? Or can you think of a creative way to handle this situation? Or more directly, what would you do if you're in charge of this organization? These are all real situations, and there's not necessarily a good answer, but we're going to discuss what the options are and how we could perhaps use both personal and anonymous forms of care. Okay, so now we are going to go into some breakout groups. Okay, thanks. So I apologize for the last minute notice, but it would be great if we could just hear very briefly from each group what you talked about, and especially if you came up with a cool way to bring together the personal and anonymous care. So how about we start with the group that talked about the cooking in Mali.
You're calling on your mother. That's no fair. We talked about how you could just appoint people that you didn't know, or that you could really ask the volunteers to eat like the local community, and I explained that Toe was eaten 3 times a day, and maybe that wasn't going to be a very good idea. And so then we talked about Marie's skill and how maybe she could be a leader and help the other women that were selected by some means to be open to cooking for people who were whose stomachs were a little more sensitive than theirs.
Okay, so the situation is we're trying to select women to participate in a cooking workshop, right? And there's one that we know really well, Marie, and so we're trying to decide how to handle that, right? Yeah.
Right.
Great. Okay. Yeah, those are great ideas. Those are really great ideas. So I think what actually happened, if I'm not mistaken, is that we asked the women in each village to delegate representatives and explain sort of the skills that would be useful and what would be involved. And Marie was actually chosen by the village along with Yaguno, whose picture you saw a couple minutes ago. And she actually has been serving, both of them have been serving as leaders to other cooks and sort of mentors. So cool, great, thank you. How about another group? How about the scholarship situation with Rupai? Can anybody tell us about that?
Yeah, I can go. Hi, Anna.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. So we spoke a little bit about this and how basically the situation was there was a scholarship program where kids needed to maintain a certain grade point average to be part of the program, but the kid's father moved and he had to take on a lot more work for their family, so his grade slipped. And the decision they're trying to make is, well, do we take away the scholarship, or when there are other kids who aren't in wanting this scholarship and other families who are in need of this scholarship. So we spoke quite a bit about from the organizational perspective, how maintaining standards could be important for accountability and for fairness of the rest of the community, and how a potential compromise could be, sorry, my dog's in the background, a potential compromise could be setting some kind of probation period or time period on when he could get his grades up. Some of the group members mentioned potentially utilizing other community resources for either mentorship or homework help or just accountability and coming together and doing homework with a couple families a couple times a week to help him achieve that goal. And then if it wasn't, if he didn't get his grades up during that probation period, then perhaps giving that opportunity to a different student who did have the great point average. But yeah, a lot of conflict between the personal and organizational on that one for sure.
Awesome, great ideas, excellent ideas. How about the group that had another situation with Susanna? Can somebody from that group share? I see Jill, who's probably had to deal with all of these situations in real life before too. Did anybody from Susanna group? No? Okay. How about my group? Can anybody share about our situation and what we talked about?
Well, I can share, but there might be some background noise. We talked about a situation with a community where there was so much really positive experience that there was a lot of gifting that started. They're listening. There's a lot of gifting that started between individuals, and that ramped up to a place that seemed distracting from the true mission the trip. And so we talked about, or the interaction, we talked about how you could come together with like a collective choice for, one second, a collective choice for gifting, maybe from the group to the group, and something that was more oriented towards preserving that interaction versus distracting from it. Did I remember that?
Yeah, awesome, thank you. So as hopefully we've seen, there are no easy answers to these things, but there are sometimes ways that we can bring together personal and anonymous care, the personal and detached perspectives in our work. And now we're going to talk a little bit more about acting from a personal perspective, because it also, in addition to helping us prioritize relational morality, it also makes possible meaningful action. So when we normally say something is meaningful, what do we mean? Like, what are some of the different things that we refer to as meaningful typically? Just shout them out or type them in the chat. What are some things, when we talk about meaningful, what are examples of things we think are meaningful?
Symbols, characters.
I see intentional relationships, things that have value, important. Learning, lasting, yeah. Memorable.
There has to be a history for something to be meaningful usually.
Ooh, I like that. Okay. So
have a relationship before something can mean something.
Excellent. I love that. So I think that when we talk about meaningful, at least in the sense of our lives or our activities, I think a lot of the things we talk about as meaningful have to do with the hope that we can live such that we will not have lived in vain. And so we can do this through leaving behind a story. We can do it by creating a story, bringing together the pieces of our lives into a story. We can do it through transcendence, so losing our sense of self in something that's long-lasting. We can do it through actions that have long-lasting consequences that lead to results, beyond the original action. I think we can also do it by committing ourselves to a purpose or by embodying a principle. And when we act in a human context, we reveal who we are as agents. And as we show ourselves, we make possible the telling of a story, which is one kind of meaning. And so, like Maya's saying, we're creating that history. And in this photo, we see a picture of a participant in a women's leadership workshop in Mali telling her story. And when she does that, she appears to others around her and finds meaning in that narrative, in that creating of a history. And similarly, when we approach others as humans in a personal context, we show who we are. And we also leave behind stories, which can generate meaning. And these sort of unexpected chains of actions that start, so when we start something, it's into a web of human relationships, and we never know exactly what's going to happen. We start new relationships, we start chains of responses that are unpredictable. And these unexpected reverberations from action are, to me, one of the most rewarding parts of this kind of work. And some of you might recognize Laura Froggatt, who's now Nichols, who was a student on my first traveling school semester, along with Annie and Lander. And during this semester, I arranged for our traveling school students to participate in a minga, which is a community work day, helping to clean the sand that filtered the water for 5 communities in Ecuador. And during that day, they worked alongside community members, and they also learned that these communities needed a new chlorine machine in order to purify their water. And so after this semester, Laura went home and she raised money to buy that chlorine machine. And we took a video of the celebration when they inaugurated that new machine, and I sent it to Laura, and she was excited and really happy about what she'd been able to make possible. And she was a pre-med student at the time, and she decided to return to Ecuador as a volunteer. And so she volunteered in a local health center and lived with a family in the community. And then later, once we were doing our Tandana mobile clinics, she came on those as a volunteer and brought her mom, who's a physical therapist. And after a few more years, Laura became a doctor, and she again returned to Ecuador with 3 other medical residents, and they all volunteered in several clinics and hospitals. And now Laura has a great career as a physician and continues to support Tandana's work. And as her traveling school teacher, I never would have imagined that all of this would happen. But to me, it's incredibly meaningful to have been just a tiny part of this story. And another example concerns Claudia Fueras. And Claudia and her family hosted Laura in their home when Laura was volunteering. And Claudia was one of my students when I first taught in Ecuador in 1998. And then in 2005, I took a group of students from the US to Ecuador, and I raised money for 2 students from the community of Panecillo to be part of that group. And Claudia was selected to be one of those students. So when our group stayed in her community, I asked her if she would be willing to teach the visiting students how to cook something that she enjoyed. And she decided to teach them how to make quimbolitos, which are delicious steamed cake. And later on, when I brought other groups of volunteers to the community, I asked her if she would do that quimbolito lesson again. And Claudia really enjoyed those experiences, and she began to dream of creating her own community tourism project with a cooking school. And Claudia is now the proud proprietor of Kausaimi, and she shares her culture with visitors and generates income for her family through this business. And in fact, you can even take an online cooking class from Claudia this Wednesday, and Trace will be so kind, I think, as to put the link to that in the chat. And taking a personal approach also makes room for meaning in the sense of actualizing a principle that can then inspire others. And Kessia Kuriba, one of our friends in Mali, described how she was inspired to show courage through her experience with Tandana volunteers. She said, "That gave me a lot of courage. I said that I too, when I go to another village, I was working in Kedu at the time, I should do like these foreigners to show that I'm together with the women there." And Umu Kansai, who is a literacy instructor, noted that she was inspired by the principle of equality. She said, "The Tandana Foundation doesn't discriminate between people. Everyone is treated the same. I too want to do like that in my family and in my literacy classes when I teach." And it definitely goes both ways. So Nola Kilpack, who was a young volunteer in that upper picture there, she said, "Claudia is my role model because she has so many dreams. Unlike most people, she does not think of dreams as only dreams, but as her real future, and she works hard to fulfill her goals." So I think that not just nonprofit organizations, but also businesses and other kind of institutions can incorporate a personal perspective to enrich their work. For example, I read about Abigail Echohawk, who is director of the Urban Indian Health Institute, and she connects technical terms from a detached perspective with personal actions and the concept of personal responsibility. Or in Cincinnati, there's a business called Cohere that brings a focus on personal connections to the work of public agencies. And they bring together everyday experts into conversations with policymakers who lead agencies, utilities, hospitals, et cetera, and they form a bridge between the personal vocabulary and the detached one. And the more institutions, organizations, and businesses use these concepts in their collective efforts, the more valid aspects of a personal approach will be seen to have for public life. And it helps us bring creative responses to the human challenges of working together. So the view from a more distant point can offer very useful information to inform our actions and give us context. But the key is to return to a personal perspective in order to act, rather than trying to manage and control from above. A topographic map is an abstracted representation of a particular part of the earth, right? Much like the abstracted depictions we get when we take a distant view of human affairs. And a map is a very useful tool, right? If we want to know where we can find water, or where the pass is between the mountains, or where we might find a flat campsite, that map is going to be really helpful. But if we're going to try and walk around while only looking at the map, we're going to have problems. We're going to start tripping over things and falling down because we won't see the rocks that are right in front of us. And so we can look at the map to learn from the abstraction and then use our personal point of view to respond to what is right around us when we walk. Now, of course, when you're walking, even more important than having your map is having your TTS swag. So by acting from a personal perspective, I think we can make possible all kinds of amazing things. And we can show respect and responsibility to each other, and we can let people know that who they are matters. And we can also find meaning by revealing ourselves, by creating stories, by starting chains of actions that continue to reverberate, or by actualizing principles that in turn can inspire others. So I'd encourage you to join me in finding ways to integrate the personal into public life. And thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Anna. We do have a few more moments. Do you want to open it up for questions?
Sure.
Folks who want to stick around?
I have a quick question, Anna. In the beginning, you mentioned about Husseini from Mali, and basically he voicing that a lot of NGOs, they build things and they start projects, but after that, they don't do any follow-up. By the same token, are their expectations a little higher? Because when we go to help, our whole goal is that they start swimming on their own, rather than we keeping on helping all the time. Hence, if I am doing something and then I've done my part, now the ball is in the court of Husseini, and he is supposed to do his part and then return the ball to me, and it goes to and fro. But to expect that the NGOs will keep doing things, isn't that something unrealistic? And what can we do about it?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ash. Thank you. You know, I think there's two parts to the challenge there. So one part is that these NGOs that he's talking about, they never asked the community what they wanted to do in the beginning. You know, they never asked them what was important to them, or if this project was something. Maybe they said, do you want it? And then of course they're going to say yes, but they never you know, made sure that this is something that's important to the community. And so that's part of the reason the community isn't following up. I think the other part is that they're not setting up community members with sort of the skills and the knowledge to necessarily follow up on this project. So that's one thing that our Mali team talks about a lot is they're very often creating committees to manage projects. And a lot of times those committees need some training on how to manage that. You know, many people in these villages have not had a chance to have a formal education. And so if they're supposed to keep records, they're not necessarily equipped to do that. Or maybe they haven't even thought, maybe they just haven't thought through, like, how do we need to set this up to make sure that it's sustainable for a long, long time. And so that's the other part there. But you're certainly right that yes, you know, the goal is that the community can then carry the project forward on their own for many, many years without additional help. But we've found, especially in Mali, that it's really useful to sort of support setting up the structures that will encourage that. And also encouraging people to require accountability of each other. you know, you create a committee, but then you also tell the village assembly, guess what? Like, it's your right and your job to ask the committee what's going on and to hold them accountable and to ask, you know, where the money is and how much money there is and what's going on and all those things, so that everyone realizes that they have a stake in it and that they have that ability and that right to check up on the people who are managing it. So I think that that's also part of the issue that they're talking about there. Thanks, Ash. Great question.
Thanks for doing a great job.
Thank you, Ash.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Orku. Thanks for coming. Yeah, I really appreciate all of you coming. It's so great to see so many familiar faces. Some of you I haven't seen since Ecuador. Some of you, perhaps I saw your daughter in Ecuador. And some of you, yeah, it's just great to see all of you. Some of you are Tandana board members and friends, and that's awesome. So thank you for supporting me.
Yes, and thank you all for supporting the traveling school and coming tonight and engaging and sharing your time and ideas. Yeah, so thank you very much, and stay healthy and keep in touch.
We can share the third question that was missed about Susanna,
Okay.
if you want.
Oh, yeah, for anyone who wants to stay on.
Okay, the question was, you have a special scholarship student, Susanna, who is 28 years old and a mother of 2 children. She travels hours every weekend to attend weekend high school. Whenever you visit her remote community with your medical teams, she's extremely helpful, greeting everyone enthusiastically, helping to find patients you're looking for, translating between Spanish and Quechua, and organizing lunch for the group. Everybody can hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. After a scholarship meeting, she approaches you with tears in her eyes. She explains that her mother has cancer and the family has no money to pay for the treatment she needs. Because she has Social Security, you're not able to help her through your patient follow-up system, since it works only with the Ministry of Health, and people with Social Security can't use the public health system. What do you do? And our answers were, somebody else from my group want to share the personal?
That's a hard one. It's a really hard one.
I wrote them down, I can, but okay. So our group said for the personal, to like treat Susanna as an exception, kind of, to go out of your way to find some solution for her, even though it's not in the scope of your organizational work or part of your regular, I guess, intake and process.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the words for it. And the organization approach would be to just something between just refer to another organization to say, here, go here, or some kind of referral that doesn't follow through to make sure they get it. And then the mixed would be, well, I guess the mixed is the most, to let everybody think about what the mixed would be. Finding the resources that you can to make sure they get the help that they need, whether it's you, but there's some resource, even if it's good, but that it will be in some places very difficult to get them through a system that doesn't have a way to get through it.
Yeah, we talked about accompanying them in the process. So not necessarily providing the financial resources for them to get the services that they need, but helping them to navigate the system and maybe walking alongside the mother and the daughter in this process.
That's a really good idea. Yeah, that's a really tough one. But like maybe there's a way, like you said, Andrea, like to provide some at least advice and support without putting them all the way into that system and providing financial resources. Yeah, that's a tricky one. It's tricky. It's not easy. Great thoughts. Thank you.
And it's nice to see you, Anna.
Great to see you too, Annie.
And
From-
Lander, hi.
from New Zealand, I haven't seen you.
And I have a friend and sister on the line too. So.
Yay. Yeah, it's great to see you too, Andrea. It's been a long time.
Yeah, it is. Has been a long time. You look the same. That's great.
Oh, thank you for coming. And you too, McKinley. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, so good to see you.
And Jill and have I seen Allie? Have I met you before?
No, we haven't. I'm a friend of Urhus.
Okay.
Yeah,
Very cool.
I live on the other side of the community that she's in. So,
Oh, okay. Oh, that's
but
great.
thank you so much. It was really great, and maybe we can connect another time.
Yeah, maybe
whenever
we
you're
will
in Ecuador.
in Ecuador sometime. Exactly. Maybe we can meet in Ecuador.
Yeah. Have a
Awesome.
good night. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
I'm going to disconnect. Bye.
Thanks.
Are you in Ecuador now, Anna?
I'm not. I'm in Colorado.
Okay. So you'll be there for a little bit, maybe.
Yeah, yep. I'm planning to stay here for a while here. Yeah.
Andrea, I like your background.
Thank you. Yeah, as the days are getting shorter and cooler here in Boston, it makes me still feel good.
Yeah, it doesn't look like Boston.
Now, this is actually Rhode Island.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody again. Feel free to, if you want to stay on and chat with Anna for a little bit more, that's totally fine.